book disclaimer, we will be talking about Coffin Moon. There will be spoilers as usual. So if you haven't read the book, feel free to drop when you get to a point where you haven't read yet. I am so happy to have Keith Rosson here with us. I love Coffin Moon so much. I think it's a great vampire story, and I'm very excited to dive in. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to again digitally be here. This is great. I really do.
It's it's very nice to virtually meet you.
Yeah.
Can you maybe kick us off with just talking about the inspiration for Coffin Moon?
Yeah, so I if you've read more than one of my books, you pretty much know that I take like a horror or supernatural trope and just kind of spin it, and Fever House was zombies and Smoke City was ghosts and reincarnation, and this is vampires. And I really I had just gotten the Fever House deal with Random House, and I thought I was very hot shit. And I wrote Coffin Moon in like 7 weeks
Wow.
and sent it off to my editor. And she was like, "Yeah, there is a story here. I just don't know if it's this one." And so I had to go back and really work on the relationships between everybody. And so maybe 10% of the original draft is actually in the book that came out. But it really is like I've been wanting to write just a vampire story for a long time. And so I finally, each book is sometimes like you reach that point where you're ready to do it. And before that, I just wasn't ready to tackle it the way I wanted to. So,
Yeah. I'm this is like one of the scariest books that I think I've read. I mean, it's
oh, that's incredible. Thank
I
you.
I think that like you did it very well because don't get me wrong, there are some very like intense gore parts, but it's
Yeah.
not overly gory. I think one of the things that to me made it so scary was how real all of these characters feel, including Varley. They feel like characters like we know and like you relate to them so much that when they're going through pain, it's even more heartbreaking, but it also just makes it more unnerving. Can you talk about how you wrote each character beat so well thought out and believable, but also so distinct?
Yeah, so I think particularly with vampires, I really wanted to disavow the reader of the notion of like uh, a a sexy vampire in a castle somewhere accruing wealth and being mysterious. Just because it's predicated so much on so many terrible things. You know what I mean? Like if you and I stay up past our bedtime, we're tired the next day at work, and they're dead. You know what I mean? Um, and the entire notion of vampirism is predicated on murder. You know what I mean? So I really wanted to run with that angle of like, oh, it's a horrible existence, um, and kind of run Varley through that colander kind of. And really, as far as like the characterization, it's like if I can convince the reader that these characters are at least potentially real and marginally walking the earth, like if there's that possibility, I can introduce whatever ridiculous thing that I want. And so that is really 90% of my job is just convincing the reader that these people may have exist and act in ways that maybe aren't the way you want them to, but at least are vaguely believable. So
Yeah.
it's really just trial and error and like editing the living hell out of it again and again and again and again.
That makes sense. I feel like even though, I mean, I know we're dealing with supernatural because we're dealing with vampires, but even the characteristics of Varley, I mean, you definitely put your own spin on vampirism, which I appreciated as a reader. It was nice to have like a fresh perspective.
Yeah.
But even that part seemed believable. Like, okay, yeah, I get that they're going to be, very sensitive to silver. Like, that makes sense. And like sunlight.
Right.
I appreciate it though that you point out several times throughout the book how fragile they are and kind of how afraid of death they still are, even though we often think of them as being immortal and pretty hard to kill. Can you talk
Right.
a little bit about the spin on that?
Yeah, again, that's just that notion of like, I mean, I don't know. You think of like I just didn't want an invincible monster. It's just joyless. You know what I mean? There's no like uh there's no give or take emotionally if it's just like, oh, it's just this unstoppable creature. And again, when I personally just really dive down into what vampirism would be, it would like very few people I think could handle it. You know what I mean? It's because again, it's predicated on like essentially uh, being a sociopath. Like it's predicated on like mass murder and continued regulated mass murder. And the only people that could really survive and thrive in that kind of environment are not dudes you want, people you want to run around with and hang out with, you know? And so it's a very like disparate, disjointed community of a bunch of like kind of broken people. There's no vampire councils or anything like that, you know, because it's again predicated on so much dark, broken shit just to exist.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because you do have two, I mean, at least two. I mean, there's the children in the museum that are younger, but you have two kind of central characters that are younger.
Mhm.
Did you get any pushback on turning these two young girls into vampires? Because they do have to make pretty difficult choices, and
Right.
especially Julia later on. I mean, she seems to embrace it, and I have a question on that. But I mean, I'm just curious if you got any pushback of like, hey, maybe they should not be so young. Like, we shouldn't have vampire children kind of
No,
running
I had
around.
it was totally the opposite because again in that like first draft where I was very full of myself, um, it was Minor who was turned and it was slowly transforming throughout the length of the book, you know. Um, and Adeline and the Children's Museum didn't were not introduced until like later drafts where my editor was like, we need a little bit more less grueling, like torturous them driving around and being sad and shit. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so she was actually introduced later, and it was uh, very well received. You know, and so yeah, again, I don't have a problem with that because if they're believable enough, then like yeah, just put them through hell. You know what I mean? Regardless of age or whatever, like go for it. You know?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I appreciate it too, because like I feel like it is rare sometimes with horror that, I know we talk about how gruesome the genre can be, but it's so often we don't go there, and you went there, and I
Right.
appreciated it, especially with Adeline, because it's so sad that at the end of the day, like it seems like she's just lonely, like she wants a
She's
companion.
desperately lonely.
Yeah,
Yeah. And she's like, she looks like she's 9 or 10, but she's, who knows how old she is. And is that's the thing that I think comes up so much in the book again and again and again with all these characters is this notion of how trauma, at least with these people, it really stops your emotional growth. Varley is the same F up that he has been for the past 100 years. He has not grown. He's still this emotionally explosive guy who literally chews through a room and then runs away. And that's what he does over and over and over again. And so that is like, and like Minor is going through that himself. And so much of this is about our like stunted responses to trauma and how hard it is to move past that, and
yeah.
how at least in Minor and Julia's case, they're using revenge as a way to avoid facing what they've experienced. It's just if they are on this mission to get this vampire, they don't have to worry about the heartache. You know what I mean? That can be put to the side for now.
When I thought it was interesting because Julia, when she's first meets Adeline, it seems like she's really impressed with her ability to command and have like power over an adult man. And to me it feels like power is kind of a theme throughout this book of like who has power, what do they do with it? And then when you drill down it's like, well, they don't really have power. I mean, they do to some extent, but it's still so fragile, that power. Do you think that Julia will ever like, I mean, it seems like she's kind of coming to terms with that somewhat towards the end, but do you think that as she stays in that state that she'll realize like this isn't the power she was really looking for?
You know, there is stuff like happening um, beyond the book as far as like development and stuff with film and all that stuff. And my hope is that it gets greenlit and everything goes well and that it's, able to be consumed as like a piece of entertainment beyond the book. I'm trying to be I signed a contract, so I can't say anything, you know what I
Of
mean?
course.
But like, I hope this gets enough of a life where I get to write about these people again because Julia has so much room to grow or not grow and be very fearsome or not fear. You know what I mean? Like there's so much room to explore with her as a character, and like I hope I get to do it someday. But as far as like what she's gonna do in the future or what, Dwayne Miner decides to do after he looks at the manuscript, like I can't tell you that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's for the reader to really discern for themselves. At least until book two comes out, if it ever gets to.
I hope it does. I hope we get it. I did think it's interesting because it does feel like a lot of Julia's life is other people making decisions for her. And then she ends up making a permanent decision for Minor. To me, that was like another example of almost like this trauma cycle that this family seems stuck in. Um, it, I'm just curious, like, was it all, I know you said originally like it was focused on Minor, but did you go back and forth any when you were rewriting the book of like Julia taking that decision away from Minor?
Yeah, that was it got to in subsequent drafts, it became a very conscious decision where it's like Dwayne Miner is just fucking drowning in grief and this kind of new responsibility that he has that he feels wholly unequipped for. And as a parent, I feel that way sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the second half of the book was very intentionally structured where he has become immobilized with just like emotional paralysis kind of, and she's calling the shots and she's the one who's moving all of this forward, and it was a very intentional thing to frame the story that way. um and she's kind of had to just, you know given all the trauma she's faced, just had to grow up super fast. And but she's still, a very young kid, and you make dumb shit decisions when you're young, and so you don't have the foresight to like think things through. And to her credit, like, when she does turn minor,
Mhm.
um he would have died otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I want to talk about Varley a little bit because he takes me by surprise a lot in this book. I mean, I think when we first meet him, you kind of think like, oh, he's horrible, he's terrible, and I think that's probably how he probably is. But I was surprised when he admits to Minor, like, hey, when I turned into vampire, like I tried to only eat bad people, like I tried to only feed on bad people. Um, can you talk a little bit about this? Because that took me by surprise. It seemed out of character for someone who seems pretty rough and tumble even before he's turned into a vampire.
yeah, I that entire scene was tough because I grew up on so much like X-Men comics and with Marvel movies and shit, there's this big overarching like 30-minute fight scene at the end with like just shit exploding everywhere and I hate that part of the movie. It's just so overwhelming. And I wanted a kind of finale that is more um, encapsulated and small, And so when they have that little like discussion at the end, um, it was tough to like get to just not have them fucking lay soliloquies at each other for the entire time. Um, but like I think that Varley still had, some sense of not morality, but a sense of like justice and fairness about things when he was a younger man. You know what I mean? And so much of his shit is predicated on, again, family stuff where it's like the love of a father figure or the respect of a father figure. And so I think, particularly when he was first turned, like that was like a concern for him, you know? Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where you just kind of try to bullshit your way through and hope for the best.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I feel like it really made his character seem layered. In addition to that, was also his kind of falling in love to his surprise with Johan. I mean,
Yeah.
can you walk us through that? Because again, like he says like I've never felt this way about anyone. He really makes a point, and then tragically, like to see this person that he actually cared about get murdered. I'm assuming that has to take him by surprise too. But I think I was just surprised that he felt so strongly about him when he was admitting it.
Yeah, and it's again one of those things where he certainly didn't plan on it, and you can tell that because he holds the gift of vampirism so tightly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just like he's like, it's mine. If there's a movie called I think Where the Day Takes You. It's really old, like 25 years old. It's a Dermot Mulroney, very tragic heroine movie from the 90s or whatever. But he talks about how like not wanting to share something is like what's mine is mine, and when I share it with you, it becomes less mine. And that is Varley's worldview to a T. You know what I mean? Even with this dude that he loves. Um, so yeah, he's at his core, um, at this point in time after having lived this long, he's he's kind of had a lot of potential goodness winnowed out of him, you know. So
Yeah.
love or not.
Yeah, and I think that sort of seeing his softer side makes losing Johan so much sadder too, because it's like it
Yeah.
feels like maybe that was like his one stake still in humanity, and then when he loses
Mhm.
it, it's like, well, what else does he have at this point?
Yeah, and that was originally when I thought of doing it, I considered like I had a lot of concern about making him like a gay or bisexual character, just because it's like, oh, the psychopath is, um, but I really wanted to not do like a male female couple, for each good guy and bad guy sort of thing. And so I had to switch it up a little bit and then tread really carefully and with some hopefully some grace in that relationship, and still make the dude shitty and scary and evil and all that, but also like again, you have to like work on making people believable. So
Yeah, and I feel like they're a good mirror almost to Bobby and Ian too. I feel like they're good like
right, right,
kids of
right.
like love to each other. So I
Totally.
think you did a good balance there.
Yeah.
I mean, power seemed like a big theme to me. Revenge is certainly like the major theme, but I feel like it's driven by not only the love for their family and like and for Varley for Johan, but also for loss. I mean, Julie has lost so much of herself as a teenager who's, had this horrible stepdad and then loses her mom to prison, and then Minor has lost all of his family, but he also lost a big part of himself in Vietnam. And then, eventually they lose their mortality by becoming vampires. But I'm curious how much the war played into Coffin Moon and if you ever considered setting it outside of the 70s.
Yeah, so this is a rad question, and I get asked it a lot. And there's the reason I had this kind of post-Vietnam setting is twofold. One is one of the precepts of vampirism that I kind of built into it is that when they're photographed or seen, they take on this kind of wending, smoke-like form where their features are. And given the prevalence of CCTV and surveillance capabilities and shit we have now and cell phones, that would just be impossible to navigate. So one was like a very practical setting, putting it in the 70s. And then the other one was like I grew up, the men in my life who were the adults, that was kind of the conflict that they had been in, you know? And I grew up around a lot of like veterans and media in the 80s and 90s was really prevalent about that war. And so to me, it felt like a more appropriate ground to till than like a more recent conflict in Iraq or Afghanistan, because there are dudes that are doing that right now better than me and more appropriately than me. And so this felt like something that I could do with some measure again of grace and responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it wouldn't, like, Minor feels so much like a Vietnam vet that it feels like that's what he was. I mean, I can't imagine him anywhere else.
Yeah, and I don't think I could do like, like a Desert Shield or Desert Storm veteran. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
don't think I got the chops for it or the understanding of it. And I would feel very trepidatious about doing it.
I really liked the structure of Coffin Moon. You have the time jumps, but we also get to experience different characters' perspective. I also really liked how the chapters have kind of an intro of like, here's what's going to happen in these parts. Can you talk about that decision? Because I feel like that doesn't happen a lot with books anymore, and I
There,
really loved it.
yeah, there is a term, an actual, I think it's like a Latin term for them. and unfortunately I cannot remember it. But I did it in my very first novel too, The Mercy of the Tide. And to me, it's just this fun little encapsulation of like what you can expect for each section, you know? Um, and you don't really know how I don't know. I've done like, uh, 10 or 11 books at this point, and some of them have come out, and I don't know like what the structure is going to be until I get way into the book. And then things start folding into place. And that one, it just felt very natural. And it was a way of like anchoring my own interest of like, oh yeah, and then I'm going to make a funny little thing here for this chapter heading. It's going to be sick, you know? So it was really a way of me holding my own interest in the book.
I loved it. I feel like it really, I mean, it to me, it made it feel like more cinematic when I was reading it. Like I feel
Mhm.
like I was like watching like a little preview of like a show or a movie of like, here's what's to
Yeah, and
come.
when you read them, it's like, what do you mean the trooper loses his head? This is going to be sick. All right,
Yeah.
you know?
I have one more question before we open it up to everyone else. I'm curious about the fragility of the vampires compared to humans. So, do you think that Varley is more fragile because he's a vampire than Minor, or do you think Minor has the upper hand because he's, not sensitive to sun or silver?
I think Varley one-on-one against Dwayne Miner would behead him,
Yeah.
no problem. And it was only this like um, with Julia that there was really any. That's why she did it. You know what I mean? Was to really gain any kind of upper hand against him. That was her entire point and what all of her sacrifices were for. But just one-on-one, like at night, yeah, he's like meat confetti. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard meat confetti, but I really love that
I just
now.
made that up. You can have it.
It's
That's yours.
great.
No problem. My gift to you.
I'd love to open it up to questions from our members if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great.
Awesome. Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah. So I love all of the action and the gore and everything like that. But I really liked what you did with Julia's backstory, um, as far as setting that where it's more atmospheric as opposed to going into great detail of the um uh domestic abuse and the violence and
Yeah.
um yeah, so you take really good care of your female characters. And I know that, since she was a kid character, but yeah, so was that a conscious choice or was that just something that you um
Yeah. First off, I got to say hello. It's nice to actually meet you. Samantha is one of the biggest like champions of my stuff, and just you are such a good reader, and like
Oh,
you are so awesome. It's great to meet you.
that's
Uh,
very nice to meet you too.
yeah, so that was that kind of stuff with her and her backstory of her mom and her dad. Weirdly enough, came really easily. And it came like it was maybe some of the easiest stuff to write in the book. And but I still had to kind of run that line between like, oh yeah, and then this shitty thing happened to, and like just
Right.
laying it on. Um, but I think that comes from like when you get in the zone writing wise, you luck into this like these stretches where the words come really easily. And again, I say grace a lot, but there's like just things come well and they work. And that was and her kind of entire backstory was just a section where it's like, oh, this makes sense. This works for her. And it just lent a kind of like gravity to her character. And so I'm glad that it rang true and well, because it was again maybe the easiest damn part of the book to write compared to how many rewrites I had to do with other parts. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Samantha. That's always really nerve-wracking, I think, especially for women when there's
Um,
stuff, uh, abuse type situations, and we're like, what's this guy going to share about a female's perspective? And so I agree. I think you did that really well. So thank you for treating Julia with care.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make a comment about the Children's Museum because that was the craziest shit to me. Like imagining because that was not what I was expecting. I was like, oh, it's gonna be like a children's museum, right? But it's like this old house, and like because you have it so atmospheric, I was thinking like True Blood, like those old colonial type houses when you see this like rundown looking thing, and then you walk in and it's these like gross, freaky children. That is terrifying to me.
Yeah.
Was that like a fun thing to write for you? 'Cause I enjoyed it. I was terrified because creepy kids freak me out, but
Yeah.
it seemed fun.
This is the rad thing where I've done 4 books now with my editor at Random House, this woman, Caitlin McKenna. She is so good, and she pushes me every book to do better. And so every book she'll be like, you need a handful of images or scenes or whatever that will snag in the memory, you know? And that was the Children's Museum actually came in like maybe the like later 10th draft or something like that. And it was because she's like, you need more like memorable things that are going to really capture people's imaginations. And so the crazy thing is I set the shit at the park, which and we live in Kenton, we live in the Kenton neighborhood, and we wound up buying a house about 100 yards away from where I set that scene. Like I had a specific house in mind and street in mind when I wrote that, and we wound up living like 100 yards away from it. So that's so fun. Every time we go up the street, I get to be like, "Oh yeah, there's the made-up children's museum right there." So, but yeah,
That's
that's really
awesome.
just like my editor really pushing me to come up with more and more and more, you know?
Yeah, I thought it was so fun. I like was freaked out, but then I was also laughing at this like old guy with a silver spoon, like waving these children
Oh, dude,
away.
my wife is like the scene where he's like, "Get back, you idiots!" With this, that's me with the dogs, 100%. As I'm trying to open up the door, you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
just that is a little, and they're crowding through and trying to get, yeah, that's totally me.
Yep, I totally get that. But
Yeah,
I think like not only was that scene terrifying and it filled this like really memorable scene, but it was so important, right, for Adeline because you truly saw like she's got 36, I think 36, 38
right.
creepy kids living in her house because she just wants friends and like all she
Yeah,
knows how to turn are kids because that's all she can attract because she is a
yeah,
kid and they don't
right.
fit because they're not developed like she is and it's
Yep.
I think it really played into her story, but it was
Yeah.
such a good scene. Such a good scene.
Thank you.
So
And
thank you
she's,
for that.
in her way, like she is emotionally stunted, and you know what I mean? So yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Love
I
it.
again, that's really my editor just pushing me to like keep developing stuff. So
So good.
thanks.
The third person point of view.
What's that?
The third person point of view, present tense. That's a great point of view. Did you was that your first choice for this book?
Yeah, I don't know why. I think that's what I'm like my next book in September is the same way. Um, and that's just the one I'm writing now is in present tense. That's just where I'm at right now. And trying to fight that is like pulling teeth, you know what I mean? So at some point you just have to give in.
Yeah, I write in that as well. And it in the beginning, like it's a little bit different to make sure that you have all your tenses in line because you're
Yep.
so it's just so natural to say asked or did
Yep.
or
He said or she said. Yep.
right,
Totally.
yeah. But
Yep.
I think it does the best of both worlds. It keeps you in that being able to be in that omniscient, be in the character's head, but also be close with them as in a first person.
Yeah, and it lends an immediacy to what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like his guts dropped to the ground or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's like they're drop like yeah. It's just it's actively happening in the moment. You know?
Yeah.
And there's something that like visually, it works for my brain so much better, you know?
Yeah, really well done.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to tack onto that, Bill, but I think that the tense would have been hard to do. I feel like a lot of times when you write from like a first person perspective, you feel automatically like you have to be on that person's side. And so at least in the third person tense that you wrote in, you're like there's some comments earlier about like, oh, I was kind of rooting for Barley and Johan in Alaska. It's like, yeah, we me too, but like I'm not supposed to, right? But if it was like he's the bad guy, so you're not supposed to feel for him. And it's hard when you don't have like when you're not tied to a person as like for sure this is me as I'm reading this book. I think that was important because then you got all the other perspectives, right? Like we needed to have everybody else's perspectives in order to have such a um I guess a like an atmospheric like the feel that you gave to this book. We needed to know what everyone was experiencing and doing. So I
Right.
agree with you, Bill. It's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, like one of these days, my goal is to like, I want to write a book at some point from just one person's perspective. And it is impossible for me right now. Like one of these days I'll do it. I am not that writer yet. You know what I mean? But that's a goal to just write first or third or whatever, but just having one character, like, and then everyone else's actions viewed through that lens would be like so challenging and so cool to actually pull off. I'm just not there yet.
Whenever I read any of your books, I feel like I have to buckle in because it's like fast paced and like brisk, and I know that we're kind of going pedal to metal. So I was wondering if you feel that like when you write it, like is that what a first draft is like for you? And then also, do you think that's anything to do with the present tense, like that feeling?
Right. That's a really good question. And I'm glad that you feel that way because I don't know if you've read like The Mercy of the Tide, which is my first book. It is dense, you know what I mean? In the sense that it is way more navel gazing and character development, reliant on character development and stuff. And so I feel like that's kind of the natural progression of my stuff. And I think that just comes from like 15 edits of a book, you know what I mean? Where you just kind of cut as much of the fat off as you can. And I mean, I think I still get tagged for being too like heady or wordy. Like I'll read reviews and it's like, oh, there's so much fucking backstory in it. Like we don't need this. And I'm like, all right, well, I needed it, you know. But yeah, I think that's just the biggest gift I've ever given myself, and I do it every book, is giving myself permission to write a shitty first draft and to just after I've finished that, then I'm more informed about the characters and what's going to happen, and I can like go back and retrace my steps, and I just know about more about how they're going to act, and I can get from point A to point B faster if I need to. Um, so yeah, that's really just like writing the living shit out of the book, you know?
With the third person present, what I find is when I'm trying to cut out filter words, like he watches, he hears, sees.
Mm.
I try to cut out as much of those as I can, just because when I give it to beta readers or anything like that, they mention the filter words, and I'm like, you know what? In this tense, it needs a certain amount of those.
Yeah.
Do you? And I noticed in your books that you have those filter words in there too. There's not an abundance of them, but they're still there.
Yeah.
Do you gauge that when you're doing all these edits?
I mean, I'm less concerned about those than I have words that I use to death that I need to every time I need to try to catch and I still miss them. Fug, there's always a fug in my book. There's rills of blood. There's starbursts of shit. Every single book repeatedly. And they snag if you keep using it, they start to snag and people are like, oh Jesus, he used starburst again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I got to be real conscious of that. But as far as like he watches or hear, like I'm less concerned about that than those other like goofy ass words that I use 10 times in a book, because those really pull a reader out.
I feel like with Coffin Moon and the Fever House duology that there's a like a crime noir kind of feel to all three books. Is that a big inspiration for you?
Yeah, I think so when I first got the Fever House deal and I talked to my editor, she was like, I have two questions for you. Are you willing to add 30,000 words to the book? And I was like, holy shit, which is very unusual, um, to have an editor ask to add more. And then the other question she had is, will you write a sequel? And so I had no plans to write The Devil by Name whatsoever. I just had planned on it ending in that infuriating way of like Catherine's just in the bathroom of her old bandmate's house and the apocalypse has begun. And just it would have driven people batshit. You know what I mean? Um, but I was just like, oh, you just changed my life. You know what I mean? Because I had been on an indie Meerkat Press before that, and I'd done four books with them. And so to have Random House be like, yeah, we want to buy this, I'd be like, oh, I'll write dog food commercials for you if you want. Do whatever you want, you know? And so, but I think that they really liked that kind of cross-pollination of genres of crime and horror. And I love both. I read the hell out of both genres and I love them. And I think it's really fun to try to mesh those two together. And so I think my publisher appreciates it that I'm kind of tilling this ground where it's maybe appealing to both, readers of both. And for me, it's fun because I could write about shitty dirtbag dudes hitting people with hammers all day long. That is like just a guy beating up another guy in a chair. Like, oh, that's my favorite thing in the world, you know?
I appreciate it because I think I'm not very good at like police procedural books. Like
Uh-huh.
it's difficult for me as a reader, but you do it so well and like so thoughtfully that I don't feel like I'm being like bogged down by the parts that I struggle with
Nice.
as a reader.
Right on. I actually got a reader reached out to me who was like an old, not old, I'm sorry. He's a retired head of like the SWAT team in the state next to mine. And he'd like, I'd love to, if you have any questions, I'd love to have coffee or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, I have like homicide detectives and SWAT team dudes like reaching out to like Dish. Like, what a treat this is. You know what I mean? And so it's really just learning enough to like squeak your way through and bullshit your way through, and then you forget, you know? Um, but just remembering enough about like police procedurals or the language enough to just kind of BS your way through it, you know?
Yeah.
What was your original word count before you had the third? What was
It's
the,
like 95 for Fever House.
wow, they wanted 34.
Yeah, she really wanted more like in after events had really started cooking, like in the Fever House, trying to um, live in that kind of growing zombified world.
I listened to that one, so I didn't read it as a book. How many? So it ended up at around 120.
120, 125, yeah.
Yeah, no, it moved so fast, didn't even feel like that.
Yeah, it was written. My wife and I had adopted two kids who were like 2 and 3, and about 3 weeks later, the state was, quarantined because of COVID. And so we had these highly traumatized 2 and 3 year olds living in the house who were like, who the hell are you? And then why can't we go anywhere? You know? And my wife was earning money. She was the main primary breadwinner in the house. And so I stayed, at home with the kids while she worked in the basement. And the George Floyd murders happened. And Portland really exploded with protests and stayed that way for months and months and months on end. And we lived right down the street from the police union. And so there would be like flashbangs and shit in our yard and like people running to escape, flanks of cops at night and stuff. So it was a really compressed, volatile, claustrophobic time. And a lot of that claustrophobia and intensity really got shoved into Fever House, you know? So that maybe more than any other book of mine is really a product of its time, and that kind of emotional intensity.
Yeah, I can't pull.
Thank you.
Mackenzie has a question in the chat. She said, "Love the lore world building with the old one, with the shapeshifting and the blood call, etc. How did you come to your version of vampire?"
That's a great question. It really is just kind of like I can't just recycle old hash stuff, and I don't want to because that's like the death kiss of a writer is just like, I'm gonna write like Bram Stoker, like it's just no fun. And so just doing enough where it's like it's reliant upon old lore, but also like having fun with it and making things interesting in your own way. Um, and I really needed Varley as a like, he has built up his maker and to be such this like cool dude, for lack of a better term. And then he finally meets him again, and they're both just bitterly disappointed in each other. And that again reinforces that notion of like power, um, poisoning everything, and familial obligation or indebtedness, and how hard and ragged that can make a person sometimes.
I really appreciate it when they were reunited though, and like Farley's kind of expressing how like, oh, like what happened to you, and
Yeah, right.
Baker's
You're
still
not
kind of like
cool.
talking shit. He's like, well, you would be dead, so
Yeah,
maybe
right.
maybe don't get too far ahead of yourself.
Yeah, they're both like kind of like, oh yeah, well, yeah, totally.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
that was a really nice part.
yeah, it was fun. And they're like, as they're like walking around that dude and like getting, all the salt is just turning to paste and shit. Like it's great. Yeah, it was super fun.
I have a question on Miner's secret because you like introduced this thing like, oh, there's something about him that we don't know yet, and you really hold on to it, and then he comes clean to Julia about it towards the end. Did you have to think about when you were going to reveal that secret, and did you always
Yeah,
have it where it was?
yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like every book is like, you get as close as you can to what you imagine in your head. You know what I mean? And the way I handled that, I still don't think I did it perfectly. You know what I mean? And so but I got as close as I could to that. And part of it is just that he wants so badly to like come back from Vietnam as like a person who is still salvageable, you know? And so to like having killed these dudes as once he's come back home really messes with him. And so having to tease that out was really really hard, and it it got shuffled around throughout various drafts. And then I finally just kind of settled on like at some point you just got to be done with the damn book. You know what I mean? So
I liked where you had it because I feel like it made sense for like where they are in that time setting.
yeah,
I was worried that it would come too soon, and then I feel like it kind of takes away from like this heaviness that he's been carrying. Because for
right.
as bad as I'm sure it feels for him to have to tell Julia that, I'm sure it
Yeah,
also feels like a little bit like a weight has been lifted that she's kind of seeing this more vulnerable side to him too.
right, right. Yeah, and it's like it's one of those things like I think back like I love the book and I think I got like I'm proud of it. But then there are like a few minor things like I think in the flap copy I made the call of like telling that Heidi gets murdered, like in the flap copy on the back. And like, I think I dropped the ball there. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
it would have been more meaningful had you not known that going in. You know what I mean? So again, it's really just like, as a writer, you just try your best. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's a few this is and that's where I'm like, oh, could have maybe handled it slightly differently.
I think, I mean, I thought it was perfect. To be
Yeah,
honest, it scared the hell out of me. So,
yeah, right on.
um,
Yeah, yeah,
uh, I know you have a book coming out in the fall. Can you tell us a little bit about it? I know you can't give away too much because it hasn't come out yet, but it
yeah.
sounds great from what I've seen online.
I'm so excited about it. We've got the cover release is coming soon. Um, I'm terrible at elevator pitches, but there is a vampire. The gang that John Varley kind of steps into, the Crooked Wheel. They appeared in Fever House as well, very briefly. They're the gang that slams Hutch Holtz's head in the van door and dents his forehead and everything. And then they appear in Coffin Moon, and now they are appearing in my new one, Crone, that comes out in September. And the Coastal Oregon chapter. Um, so this detective Eli Lamp, he's an ex-detective, drug addict, all this. His daughter has gone missing 15 years before, and he has kind of burned out his life trying to find her. And in that process, he's lost his job, lost everything, and become indebted as an enforcer and a dope grower for this gang. And then when the head of the gang's son is murdered, he comes to Eli Lamp and he says, if you use your detective skills and find out who killed him, then your debt is free and you can walk away. So he starts trying to figure out who killed this guy, who's not a great dude. And eventually it all starts intertwining with his daughter's disappearance. And there is something in the woods nearby that is ripping the living shit out of people. And somehow it all comes back together and comes full circle.
This sounds amazing. It also
Yeah,
sounds very scary again. So,
thank you.
is there any supernatural entity or trope that you haven't written yet that you'd like
Yeah,
to
I mean,
tackle?
there's tons of them, and I
Yeah.
like. I mean, I want to write a werewolf novel at some point. I want to write a UFO book at some point.
Mhm.
Um, right now, I'm in the middle of writing what is essentially a haunted house
Oh,
book,
cool.
um, and it's really hard. And every book is the hardest book I've ever written. You know what I mean? And like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing every single day. Um, and eventually I'll have some measure of like that stretch where, writing about Julia and her backstory. I'm like, eventually I'll get where it's like that easy again, but oh my God, it's just not there yet. But yeah, there's tons that I want to try and hopefully I never run out of ideas.
Yeah. I don't think you will. I mean, again, I really I look forward to it because I think that your twist on kind of like what we're expecting is always very enjoyable.
I
So,
so appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah.
this haunted house one is essentially like a like venture capitalist slash um like you know Amazon-esque thing tries to privatize hell essentially. And we'll see how
Wow.
it goes. You know what I mean?
Sounds maybe a little too close to reality
Yeah,
at
right.
the
Yeah,
moment.
totally.
Wait, so you have like so many ideas that you want to write. Do you have to take like when you finish a book, I know you said you try to power through your first draft and then you focus on the editing. When you're done with a book, do you have to like pause, like debrief, go do something, or are you like on it to the next one? Do you
Well,
just keep
that's the
writing?
bummer with like Fever House, I feel like it's like five disparate books all shoved together. You know what I mean? And so that's really kind of what I have to do to keep myself occupied as a writer. And so I am always like always thinking, and I'm very lucky because it's like it's what I get to do and it's also what I love to do. Like it's the funnest job in the world. And so it's really like if anything, I have a hard time taking a break when I'm done with a thing, because I'm already like taking notes for the next thing.
Yeah. Do you have like drafts going of
You
like
know,
multiple things at once,
yeah.
or do you focus?
Well, that's the crazy thing is like for every book that I finish or short story I finish, I have 20 things that just died on the vine. You know what I mean? Halfway through where the idea I crapped out on the idea or the inspiration died or whatever. And so I have like so many just half-written shitty things. But the cool thing is I save them all because like I don't know, 2 months ago, I resuscitated a 10-year-old story and was able to finish it. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
Nice.
that is a rad feeling to have. So, yeah, it's really just, I have a hard time finishing things, but I am writing constantly.
Yeah. Do you think you'd ever turn some of those unfinished stories into a short story
If they didn't suck,
collection.
yeah, but they all suck, you know? And so, yeah, like I have a new story collection coming out that should be announced soon, and it's all the majority of it is published stuff that has been out on a variety of venues. I love short stories. I'm also terrified that like it's very hard to write them now because I have just novel brain, you know? But yeah, I love reading them and I love when I have the brain power. I love writing them too.
Nice. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on that. I love a short story collection.
Right on. Awesome.
I feel like your covers are really great, but they all remind me so much of like music album covers. But I also feel like all of your novels also feel very musical too. Are you a bit like a big music guy? Because I feel like all of your books feel very metal in like a good way, in like a very positive way.
Yeah. So yeah, I am like punk was a very galvanizing force for me as a teenager and still is. And I'm actually also an illustrator and graphic designer and legally blind, which was a fun little combo that is very challenging, has been very challenging at times in the past because like I didn't know I was visually impaired until I was 10 because my mom's life was just kind of crazy. And so then when she finally settled down, she's like, oh my God, he's illegally blind. Good Lord. But by then I was also very enmeshed in um, illustration, you know what I mean? And I just drew all the time. And so I started branching out into like doing record covers for punk bands and stuff. And so my first four books on Meerkat Press are covers that I did myself. And then Fever House and The Devil by Name were done by a woman named Ella Latham, who now works for Saga. She's the art director there. And then Coffin Moon and the upcoming Crone are done by a woman named Arushi Manan. And so I've just been very lucky to have just absolutely killer graphic designers for my stuff. Like they are so good. So
They're sick. I like too how their uniform. I mean, they're each kind of stand out in their own way, but you can tell it's like your book, and I
they're
really
so
love it.
yeah, they're so good. And the yeah, the Crone is just it's like black and white, and then there's like this insane neon green on it. I'm just like, oh, the best color combination on earth. Yes.
I'm so excited to see it.
All
Thank you.
right.
Thank you again for joining us tonight. I was so excited to have you on. I mean, again, this book, like, it gave me nightmares, so I'm glad that we got to talk about it. Hopefully, that helps my healing journey from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, you're welcome, and I'm sorry. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. I really appreciate it.
Of course, you're always welcome back. Come back for
Yeah.
Chrome. We'd love to
Yeah.
have you.
Cool.
Awesome.
All
Thank you
right.
all.
Well, yeah, thanks so much. And again, like books live and die on pre-orders. So comes out in September. Crone, please consider it. All right.
I've
Thank
We'll
you.
already
um
figured it.
we'll put the pre-order link on our socials too, so
Oh,
it's
sweet.
easier for
Right
everyone
on.
to find.
Well,
Thank you all
cool.
again.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Keith.
All right.
Thanks,
We'll talk to you
Keith.
guys later.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.